Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I am so thankful that you have taken the time to join us today. Today is an interview with Nancy Bleeke, the founder of Genuine Sales. So Nancy is a sales enabling coach. I want to call her a sales trainer, but she hates that term, and I think appropriately so. I have been through Nancy's course twice, actually. The first time when I launched my firm back in 2012, and more recently in 2015 as a refresher. But Nancy helped open my eyes to how I could be a much more effective salesperson. And I know as fee-only advisors, we say, well, we don't sell anything, but we do. We sell our service and we sell ourselves. And we have to be good at sales if we want to be able to bring clients on. And I get a ton of questions from advisors saying, I'm good at generating leads and I know I'm a great planner, but how do I turn those leads into clients? Well, this interview helps lay the foundation for developing an effective sales process for your firm. We walk through the method that she has developed and trains advisors on, and I can tell you from personal experience, it is highly effective. As always, you can access the show notes and additional resources at xyplanningnetwork.com/41. And be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. All right, without any further ado, here is our interview with Nancy Bleeke. Hey, Nancy, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
So it is Nancy Bleeke. We always have to pronounce last names very clearly because people always mess them up. So it is not Bleeke. It's not Bleeke. It is Nancy Bleeke. That was our first ever episode was actually Michael Kitsis. And that was like, I feel like the number one takeaway was how to say his last name. No one actually knew. So it was great. So I am so excited to have you on. For our listeners, Nancy is my sales enabler coach. She does not appreciate the term sales trainer because she actually does so much more than that. And so just a quick background, and then we'll jump in, was that actually when I launched my business back in 2012, Nancy, you emailed me and said, hey, like I have a one slot, maybe somebody had dropped out in the sales course that you were teaching and said, do you want to come down? And I did. And honestly, it really turned my business around. I guess the way that I thought about sales and communicating to prospective clients, it really changed my entire process. And then I actually went back through the course this past year and took Stacy, who does all the sales for XYPN. So very familiar with the program. So again, thank you for taking the time to be on.
I'm so glad to be here. You really are like one of my shining stars from the last few years.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
So I guess just a little bit of background. How did you get into this profession? I mean, what is your background that led you into kind of being a sales coach or sales enabler? I'm going to continue to call you a sales trainer by accident, but a sales enabler.
Like many people, I never sought to go into sales. I mean, like many of the advisors that I've worked with over the years, they want to do good planning. They want to help people, manage wealth differently and live better lifestyles and don't think that sales is part of it. And I was the same. I was in business. I got my master's degree and I shied away from sales because those were the, unethical, pushy, obnoxious people that nobody wanted to talk with. And in my career in management and financial services and in human resources and hiring the right people and bringing in good training solutions, I started really appreciating sales and that any company that is selling well grows. And so over about a 5-year period of time in hiring a national sales force and, equipping them with the processes and the training and such, I thought, I can do this. And gosh, they've got better schedules than I do. They can make a lot more money than I do. And, I need to jump on this sales bandwagon. And so I, over the years had sold in a jewelry store as extra income when we first got married, to be able to put in our new driveway. And so I was dabbling in sales, but never committed to being a professional salesperson. And so that all changed in 1997 when I was introduced to a sales methodology, a way to have the conversation and the way to approach people and help them, get to decisions. And it just changed my world. And since then, I have embraced it. I study sales. I study salespeople. I study sales organizations. And I have the privilege of not only my own experiences, but the privilege of working with thousands of salespeople and learning the best practices and the things that really get in people's way, and then be able to help them be more skillful and willful in how they do it. And so I was a reluctant salesperson, and now I think everybody should embrace sales, because that is the difference in growing your business and being successful and not.
It's so true. And I don't know why it fascinates me just to hear how people get to where they are in their career, because it is always a twisting and winding path. And especially because we do have a lot of listeners that are still in college or just starting their career. And I always want them to hear these stories because I want them to know it's not a straight linear path like we're led to believe. And you have to chase opportunities and try new things. And you'll learn that what you think you're good at or what you enjoy doing when you're 18 or 20 or 24 isn't necessarily what you'll enjoy doing throughout your entire career. But I imagine that there are some listeners out there that are having the same reaction that I used to anytime we use the word sales. And part of that is because, the listeners here are financial advisors, and many of them, potentially most of them, are fee only. And one of the things is that, our industry, as you know, came from product sales. It came from insurance sales, which, I don't know who I'd rather go see, an insurance sales guy or a used car sales guy. But they both make me, want to never, ever have insurance or drive a car ever. And that's, I think, what people think of when we think of sales, and so the fee only advisors out there say, I don't sell anything. I don't sell any products. And they are correct. They don't sell insurance, but they still have to sell. And it's one of the the difficult hurdles to overcome is that anytime we start to feel a little salesy, like, oh no, I'm pushing my services, we can get a little squeamish. I think that's just cultural in financial planning.
And that leads then to being not confident, which is felt by the other person. But they don't know what not to trust. They don't know what not to feel confident in. They just know something's not right here. And so, the first sell has to be to yourself.
That's a really good point.
I love working with college students and people early in their careers, because one of the first things I'll say is, in a group, how many of you chose a sales career? And hardly anyone raises their hand, whether they're 55 or 25. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C. with a software company, and we had about 18 1 to 3 years out of college people. They got to come into a room for an hour and pick my brain, as the owner said. And I asked, how many of you thought you'd ever be in this role? And nobody raised their hand, not one of them. I said, how many of you think you'll be in sales in 3 years? Nobody raised their hand. And it was a fascinating discussion on, why are you doing this then? What do you want out of this point of your career? And we got into talking about how much parental influence has on career choices, which I've always known, but it was fascinating to hear them talk about how they feel they're letting their parents down by being in sales. So not only do I work with financial services people, I actually work with engineers. And I have had more than one parent when I've said, listen, there's a great program at Rexnord Manufacturing for engineers, and it takes them into the sales engineering route. And the parents will say to me, well, my son's an engineer, they're not going into sales. And right away, they're putting up barriers. And I remember about 7 years ago, I heard one of the big financial companies started doing PR and marketing to the parents of college students, because they realized if they can't get the parents to accept it, they're having a harder time recruiting the students. And so if any of you are in that position where your parents are telling you, sales isn't the way to go, you've gone to college, for goodness sakes, don't let them deter you from the parts of your job that our sales, because the sooner you embrace it, the more successful you're going to be. And Alan, that is why I say you're one of my shining stars, because you very early in starting your firm accepted the opportunity to be skillful in selling and immediately were making the connections on, oh, if I get better at this, it helps me do this and this and this. And as you said, you redid your process. And if I recall correctly, one of the things that you wrote way back then was that in those months, you were closing 100% of your opportunities. Because,
yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, by embracing that, it allowed you to ramp your business and be able to help people with their finances.
You bring up a couple of awesome points, and one being parental influence. That's a whole other conversation around that. I remember when I was in grad school, I taught a couple undergraduate classes, and I had to literally write into the syllabus, your parents cannot contact me, because that had been a problem with parents calling going, why did Johnny get a B minus? I'm like, I am not going to talk to your parents. But I think people think of careers as we're going to get into sales or we're not going to get into sales. And while there are some positions that have the word sales in the title, there are some positions that involve more selling than others. We're always selling. And the techniques that you teach, while I think the process is more geared towards, maybe Stacy on our team doing, talking to a prospective member and walking them through that process. I think about other members of our team like Maddie, who handles all of our member services and signing our members up for services that we offer, getting them involved, selling them on the value of a study group. These processes, you're always selling. And and even if it's not in business, you're selling in your personal life.
Mm-hmm. After all these years of focusing on sales, I'm in my 19th year now of helping people be more effective in selling conversations and process. It was just a couple of years ago where I thought, everyone is in sales. I've always thought everyone's in sales. And I remember when I was first exposed to sales training, I was in human resources and realizing how I was selling job opportunities and I was selling policy, compliance, and I was selling all the time. But it was only about 2 years ago that I realized what I believe is the true definition of selling. And that selling is simply helping someone else do or decide. So helping someone else work through whatever decision making they need to make a commitment or a decision to something or to take an action. And so, like you said, Maddie in member service, absolutely is selling.
And most people would look at her job and go, well, she's not the one in sales. That's only Stacy. But it's so not true. Like you said, everyone is in sales in so many facets of our life. And again, whether that's professionally or personally, probably our personal relationship is all a version of sales in many ways. So if we just look at, I guess, as a whole, it's so critical. And again, for the fee-only advisors out there that are cringing at the word sales, ultimately we are selling. And in many ways, I think it's harder to sell what we offer than selling an insurance product. Sometimes I wish that I could be in the business of selling tangible assets like a house or an insurance policy, because the relationship sales and selling a service is just, I think it's a challenge. I think that it absolutely can be done, but I think it's even more difficult and requires a lot more time, energy, effort. But, one of the things I'll clarify that you had said was early on, me going through the course and the effect that it had. And it's absolutely true. And I think the big piece was that I remember being told when I was very young that there was like 8% of the population or whatever percentage it was that was wired for sales. Like that they were going to be the good salespeople because they had the personality for it, and that they were going to be good at it and everyone else is going to be bad at it. I remember thinking you're either naturally gifted at sales and it's a personality, or you're not. And we talk to people all the time. We think, wow, you're really good at sales. And we talk to other people who think, wow, you would be really bad at sales. And yet I'm not. And I think that was the myth that I brought in whenever I was first starting my business, was that either I was going to be good at it or bad at it. And what I learned by actually going through your course, which is basically it teaches a process of sales, and it basically, and we'll talk more about that, but that you could actually get good at sales, you could get better at it, and you could become great at it if you put in the time and energy. So I think that was the big mindset shift for me. Was it wasn't a from birth gift, it was something that you could develop.
Oh my gosh. And you know what the problem is when people say that it's an at birth gift, they're usually thinking about someone who's a good talker. they can talk to anybody and they can do this and, they're gregarious. And those personality traits do not make a great salesperson and often can get in the way of being a good sales professional that is helping other people get what they want in the way they want it. So I just cringe when people say, well, they're natural. They're just a natural. Well, it's a skill. It's a skill set that we can learn to be successful at.
And I'd be interested to know if there are personality traits that kind of drive gift for sales. And I'll use my dad as an example. If you meet my dad, he's actually fairly quiet and reserved. But if you drop him into a conference setting, he sells police cars and he exhibits at like sheriff conferences. Who knew those existed? And Dad is known as the guy who will literally talk to every person in the building, which is so funny because people view me as more of the talker and the gregarious one. And you drop me into a conference and I'll talk to like 3 or 4 people. It's just not my personality. And so, but I look at him and he is a phenomenal salesman, but he's not gregarious. He's not the most outgoing guy, but he talks to everybody and he talk about he can make friends anywhere. So I do wonder if there's like a component of personality that helps and some components that are challenging, but I've seen great salespeople that are introverts, that are extroverts, that are talkers, that are not talkers. So, to your point, I do think it's a learned skill.
I think that, more than personality traits, it's about qualities, having the right qualities. So when you talk about your dad, he probably is a great listener. So he's able to connect with people and make them feel important and make them feel comfortable, versus that it needs to be about him. But I would say his characteristic, you said that he can talk to everybody, is he doesn't have a fear of approaching new people, which is different than being talkative and gregarious.
And also, the type of sales that you're doing, I could see being driven by the personality. So because he's in government sales, he does a lot of contract work and basically building relationships, doing big contracts, and then selling hundreds of cars at a time. Whereas a retail sales guy has to be able to walk up to somebody random in the middle of a parking lot, make a quick connection and sell to them. He hated retail car sales. And yet the used car sales guy is even different. So I do wonder if, there's a right sales position fit for certain personalities as well.
Yeah, definitely. In our assessments, one of the first things we do is they have to identify the profile of the type of sales. Are you calling on an individual in a business setting? Or in your world, are you calling on couples? Very different selling to couples than it is to a purchasing manager in a business. So knowing, who would you be calling on? Who do you need to get decisions from? How strategic is the sale? What's the follow-up that happened? All of that contributes to the right person that can be successful in it. And so, with advisors, there's nuances because you're selling a service to a consumer. It's not a business to business sales, to a consumer. And yet there's a decision-making process there. If they have a spouse or significant other, there's 2 factors, of people to keep in mind and have to, be able to work with both of them, bring them together on a decision. There's definitely some nuances there that in some typical product or business sales is not as complicated.
And it's kind of funny because I think what we sell is amazing. I mean, really, the benefits of financial planning are just so overwhelmingly valuable. And yet I think as financial advisors, we are just awful at articulating the value of planning. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just those of us that get into financial planning just aren't the best at articulating it, or we haven't defined it well enough, or what it is. But, we have something amazing to sell. And that's what I always encourage people when they say, well, I'm not in sales. I'm like, you are in sales and you have something amazing to sell because you're helping people.
Right. And until you can get them to make a decision to do something, you're not helping them.
Right. One of the other interesting things whenever I went through your sales course, and something I had never thought of, was actually having a process. And I think this was the number one takeaway that I had among many from, I guess, going through sales training, was that sales is a process. It is not something you just haphazardly do. And I'm not a process-driven person at all. My team just would tell you that I can't follow a process if you paid me to do it. But that was one of the big things that I forced myself to do, was sit down and have a process. And you advocate for a very strict process, really, because it becomes replicable and you get good at it, but then you can test it and you can see what's working and what's not working and then fix pieces of the process. But if you don't have a process, how are you supposed to know what's working? So is that a fair explanation of
genuine sales? Well, I'm going to step back and say the process that you're talking about. So there's two processes. Well, there's several processes in sales, but there's your sales process of, discovery meeting, presentation or recommendation, implementation, gathering the data you need to actually set up their accounts and such. Mm-hmm. That's, the overarching sales process. What you're talking about, I think that it's a little different that people don't think about, is that the conversation has a process. That there's a framework and a flow to good conversations that have a beginning, a middle, an end. And that's where people are ineffective and inefficient, is that we go into it maybe having planned out some things, but not thinking about the conversation from start to finish. And what do I need to accomplish along the way to earn the right for that other person's time and attention for the next part? And so, by giving it a framework, and you say it's very structured and very rigorous, it's a framework, but the key is making it your own. So how you start a conversation, there's a couple of guides there, but the words you use are going to be different than the words Stacy uses. Stacy can't replicate you. And so many times people who are really good, when they bring people on their team, are like, well, they just need to listen to me and do what I do. That's great if they're you, but if they have a framework that they know, this is the next part. I need to start by making a connection with them and breaking their preoccupation. Okay. There's a multitude of ways of doing that. What's comfortable so that I come off as genuine and approachable and trustworthy? Then how through that do I earn the right to ask them questions and find out what are the problems, opportunities, wants, or needs that my service might help them with. And if I can't get them to articulate that and ask the right questions that they'll answer, I can't start telling them what I can do for them because it's premature and they're not going to listen. There's not going to be value there. I'm going to, set up the wrong situation. And then that leads into then being able to share your recommendation and connect it to them, which leads to, what concerns do you have? How do I work through that with you? And then how do I then ask for your decision or commitment to what's next? It's a process, but along the way, we can't lose ourselves in it. And it's funny with financial services, I tell people, you are talking to people about what I hope is the third most important thing to them in their world, their money. Mm-hmm. I hope there's other things more important, but there's no doubt that it's really an important thing to people. And to pay a fee for something that they don't know that there's value in, or wait, I have to pay for something. I thought you're going to help me manage my money. I thought maybe you'd help me invest it, or you're going to, help me get more money away for retirement. But if I'm paying you a fee, that's counterintuitive maybe to me to do that. And so we're asking them to part with something really important to them. And we have to be able to paint that picture and connect it to what that value is, which you said is harder to articulate because it's not as tangible. It's not if you do this, here's what I can guarantee you. It's, I'm going to walk alongside you on your financial journey, and I'm going to, help direct these different aspects and ask you questions and get you the right things. And when your career takes a different turn in 5 years, we'll be right alongside you so that you can look at your options. But there's no guarantees there. You're selling your expertise and your service and your relationship with them. So it's still a conversation, but it's not where you can just plop a product in front of them.
Right. It's not tangible, and yet it is so valuable. And you just touched on so many awesome things. And one, I want to dig into each of those steps of the process so listeners kind of know a little bit more about each of those pieces, because we're basically trying to cram a 2-day intensive course along with 7 or 8 follow-up days of information into, obviously just chatting here for an hour. But, I think the typical sales process for a financial planning firm, and this is just from my own anecdotal experience, others may have a little bit different story, is that ultimately we know the final goal. The goal is to get people to sign on to be a client. Too often, and this is what I found, was that once I refined my sales process, I started signing up. I literally went for like 2 months where every prospect signed on. That was the 100% close that you mentioned. And then I realized, one, I was undercharging, and two, I was working with the wrong types of clients. I wasn't doing a good job of filtering out who was going to be a good fit for me. But we tend to just say, like, anybody that walks in the door, if they can fog the glass, we'll work with them. So we know that's the close. And I think the typical prospect meeting is, tell me about yourself, tell me about your money, why did you call a financial planner? And then we throw up a bunch of big charts and graphs to say, this is what we do, this is our service model, this is how much we charge. Wildly ineffective. And so to your point, and thank you for the correction, that while it is a stringent process in terms that you're following the same process every time, you're following the framework every time, but you can make it your own. And so let's just kind of dig into each of the steps, because I think they're so important. And you have an acronym to help listeners remember the process. And what is that?
What's in it for them?
What's in it for them? I love it.
So WIIFT, right?
So the W. So let's start there.
Well, just one thing about the what's in it for them. As you are working with people, the more that you focus everything you do or say on what's in it for them, you're going to make it a great experience for them and make sure that they're getting what they need to feel comfortable and trust you to keep moving forward. So that, to me, is the foundation to it all. Everything we do, everything we say, if we can't come up with an answer to what's in it for them, we shouldn't be having the conversation.
It's such a good point.
But by using that WIIFT, that also then becomes the framework to the conversation. So as you said, it starts with W. So the W is the wait step, and it's waiting to initiate a conversation, and waiting is preparation. And so it's making sure that we know who we're talking to, what can we find out in advance. And today, with everything on social media, there's so much more that we can find out about people before we ever meet with them, to start getting some of those insights into what are their hobbies? Where do they spend their time? Do they have a family? Is education important to that? I mean, there's so much we can pick out.
I remember finding a prospective client's Instagram page one time, and they, because whenever they were booking with me, I got their name, their, email address, their mailing address, and for whatever reason, her Instagram popped up, and she was a big CrossFitter. And I remember feeling a little creepy about it, because I'm like, this is on the internet and I found it, but I didn't say, hey, I saw you were on, I see you're a big CrossFitter, but I was able to work in the fact that I am a member of the CrossFit cult at some point in there and make that connection. But I think that as advisors, we don't do a very good job, one, of preparing and really understanding who we're talking to, but also just pausing and giving ourselves some time to really gear up for the prospective client meeting or that prospective client call. We tend to rush into things, I think, and we don't take time to just kind of clear our heads, clear our schedule, and really just focus.
Well, and thanks for, bringing that up, because it is preparation with the paper, or technology, where we're looking at things and we're making notes. And that's a level of preparation that most people don't make the time for. But then what you just brought up is so key. Before picking up that phone or connecting, walking to that person's office or opening your door for them to walk in, it's those final moments of clearing your head and focusing on them and ignoring everything else. So I always call it the myth of multitasking. If you remember, our brain cannot do three things at one time. It cannot. And so we have to put everything else on pause when we're ready for that actual conversation. So we got to do our prep. And that actually helps us focus during the conversation, but then that mental pause right before.
And so it's with it. What's in it for them? So wait is the first step. What is the next step?
We got to initiate the conversation. And I think that that's one of the things that people wing a lot. It's like, I can wing that. I can talk to anybody, or, I'm going to ask them about this. But we really have to be purposeful in our initiation and knowing that people have three questions in mind when we first talk to them. Who are you? are you credible? And, is there something you can do for me? And we have to be able to very quickly eliminate those answers so that they're open to a conversation. And one of the key things is to not talk about the pitch. And I know sometimes you still mention that, Alan, but, I believe
right.
that, pitching, I just wrote an article about it this morning for a magazine. Pitching, when you're getting pitched at, you've got 4 choices. The recipient has 4 choices, right? They can bat it away, whatever's being pitched at them. They can catch it, which is what we would want is them to hear us. They can duck, or there's a 4th option. I can't think of it right now. Duck, hit it away, catch. What's the 4th? What's your 4th option?
Bunt.
Or yeah, right. You can just kind of like try to avoid or something. So when we're pitching at somebody, they've got a lot of choices of what they can do with that information that's flowing at them. And so instead, if we don't think about it as a pitch and we think about it as like, I'm starting a conversation with a person or people, a couple or a family or whoever it is, we need to start that conversation where now that we're ready and we've broken our preoccupation, we need to help them do the same. We have to connect them to why are we here? Why is it valuable for them to take this 15, 20 hour, meeting with us? And what's our agenda? And making sure that it aligns with what they were thinking we're going to do. Now we're like, okay, so this is what we're going to accomplish. And then we can make that connection. So we can say, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, as I was getting ready for our meeting, I always see what I can learn about you ahead of time to make the most use of your time. And I found that we have in common CrossFit. Mm-hmm. And it's now a perfect segue into what got you into CrossFit, or it's something where we're connecting with them and we're confirming that they have the amount of time. So the initiation is helping them get centered in the conversation and set the stage that, this isn't going to be what maybe you're thinking, where I'm going to talk at you and pitch at you. I'm setting up a conversation to determine whether or not what you need to accomplish, I can help you with.
So we've set up the conversation. We've kind of gotten ourselves ready. We've gotten our prospective client ready. We've set up the kind of everything for the meeting. So then we move into the 3rd step, the next I in with it.
The investigation. And the investigation, you talked about it. Everybody knows we have to ask questions, but we have to ask very relevant questions that they want to answer. So we can start drilling off the, tell me about yourself, tell me about your financial situation. And if we do a lot of those very direct, sometimes they become rapid fire questions where they know you're checking off a list. It starts feeling like an interrogation. And what happens if you're on the receiving end of an interrogation? What would you do, Alan?
You shut down.
Start protecting.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, you've got to, you're talking about people's money. You're talking about some things maybe they're not proud of, choices they've made in the past. And so they're not going to just blurb all of that out necessarily to you. Or they might not have thought about their goals with what they want to do with their financial, aspect of their lives. And so we've got to ease them into that by being purposeful with the questions that we ask. And so we give a framework. We want to find out about today. We need to learn what they want to do tomorrow. And then we really need to ask them questions about risk. What is their risk tolerance? What are their fears about money? What are their fears about working with somebody regarding their financial, health? And get them articulating that, because then we can work with that. But really importantly, we also have to talk to them about the rewards that they're looking for. What are the things that would make it easier for them, in their life regarding their financial, not only, future, but how they are approaching it. So when I go back 20 some years ago to when we selected a financial advisor, one of the key things that I hadn't thought about, because I loved playing the stock market and I loved figuring out, all of these things, was what was the amount of time that I was spending on it, and was the amount of time in connection with the other goals I had in my life, with a young family and a business that was starting and all of those things. And even though I enjoy doing it, I consider myself a smart, person to be able to do it. I could see, he helped me see that in the next 20 years, I wasn't going to have the time to do what I had done in the last 10 years. And so holy crap, that made me really nervous. Like, like I'm going to start making bad decisions. And, because I'm not going to have the time to spend, an hour a night or 2 hours on the weekend reading about this or doing that. And so to me, that was a huge motivator on why we needed outside help. So, we can hire people to clean our house and save us time that way. We can hire people to mow our lawn. We can hire people to do this. But I hadn't thought about outsourcing basically financial aspects for our family.
It's a really good point. And you use the term risk tolerance. And I know financial planners are anytime we use the word risk tolerance, people switch to investment risk. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the risk of not hiring a financial planner. So basically, what are the risks and the rewards? What are the benefits and the potential loss, in really keeping clients, figuring out what concerns them and connecting what we do with those concerns. I love that you have a lot of acronyms in the training because it really helps to remember everything. And one of those is POWNS, POWNS, problems, opportunities, wants, and needs. And it really comes down to that's what we're trying to address. We're trying to figure out what are their problems, what are the opportunities, what are the wants, what are their needs, and then connecting what we do with what they're looking for. And I think that is a huge misstep that so many advisors make, is we just assume everybody's looking for the same thing and they all get the same pitch in many ways, is that they're all getting the same, hey, this is what I do and this is who I do it for. And this, and it's not catered to the specific person that's sitting in front of you.
Right. So then they're not paying attention.
Right, because it doesn't apply to them.
Exactly. And the other thing is, and this is that the next part of the conversation is, once we get them to talk about their pawns, and so often people are like, focus on their needs. Well, wants are the emotional aspects. Those are more powerful often than a need. And if we ignore those, which is the risk and the reward, we don't have good positioning to the value that they're going to get. So finding out and getting them to verbalize things that maybe they've never thought of, or maybe are really deeply kept close to them because they don't want to look stupid. I think that's a big thing with finances. People don't want to look stupid. They don't want to admit, like I said, past mistakes, where it might be like, why the heck would you have mortgaged your house in this way? Or why would you have, put your money in this? They have to know that they're not going to be judged. I think that's a huge fear. So I constantly, even, in social settings when people will be talking about getting close to retirement or whatever, I'm like, well, who do you work with? Oh, no, we do all that ourselves. And I'm like, oh my gosh, are you sure of this and this? And I'll give them, my story of the advantages over these 20 years that working with a financial advisor has done. And they always are like, well, we've made some really stupid choices and I don't want to be lectured. I don't want to be lectured, or they don't want to feel bad about their past. And it keeps them from getting the help that could help that could make their future so much better. So if we're ignoring those wants, we're missing out on where we might really be able to position the true value in working with us. So the pawns is such an important thing. What problems are they having financially, but what are the opportunities or the dreams they have that just seem like they could never achieve, that with good, fiscal responsibility in their own family, they could achieve, but they don't even think of it as a real possibility. All of those things, those dreams, can help us position our value to them. So pawns, very, very important.
So then moving on to the fourth step, the F.
Yes. Facilitate. Facilitate. Make it easy. That's what the word means. Make it easy for them to find out how what you do helps them personally. So get rid of the laundry list of the 12 things you can do and focus on the 3 or 4 that they just told you are most important. And that's where you're going to help them make a decision to work with you. And you brought it up earlier. When we're giving them information, we have to connect it back to them. And if we can't make a connection, I call it the, what do they need to know, connected to the what's in it for them, then it's information we shouldn't be wasting their time with. And that's where the real, I think, expertise comes in. And I really don't think I've ever met a financial advisor who wasn't knowledgeable about finances, about,
Very true.
Right. But what happens is the challenge comes in using that knowledge expertly in presenting it and making it relevant to the specific person, the specific situation. You've heard me say it, right sizing. I got to right size the information I'm going to share in every conversation to what I know about them, what they've been willing to admit, what's most important to them. And that means I've got to take 12 bullet points and cut it down in the moment so that we're still in a conversation and they're listening.
Because as advisors, we do so much and we meet all of the needs of the client. I mean, anything that touches their money, we can do. And we can list out that whole laundry list. But to your point, I have always found clients never walked in my office and said, I woke up this morning and decided to hire a financial planner. Usually something happens, a death, a divorce, a birth, a new job, something has happened. And clients many times come to us in transition and just like something has sparked their desire to come talk to a stranger about money, which is a huge deal that we should not take lightly. And yet, if I give them the laundry list of all the things I do, why not just focus, to your point, on the one or two things that are really, really stressing them out? Show them how we can meet those needs, how we can help them address those, take that stress and that anxiety away, and then kind of move them through as part of our actual service model, the rest of what we do. We don't have to explain it all up front in order to get them to sign on to be a client, because honestly, it's those wants, it's those anxieties that they're coming to us with. If we can show them that we can meet those, that gets them into our process. And financial advisors has such high retention rates with clients because once clients are in the system and they're in the process, they love it and they see the value of it. And so it's in many ways just meet those initial concerns and then get them into the system.
Right. Don't oversell. That's what I say. Don't oversell or overtell. So don't think you have to give them every piece of information you have to show your expertise, because it's been proven that asking good questions, listening, reflecting back on it, asking them follow up to those questions, position you more as an expert than you giving them a 10-minute dissertation on some kind of financial topic.
Very true.
And if you notice, I'm sure that everyone has so much information these days that I think that the successful professional is the person that can help their buyer, their potential client, sift through and get to what's most important and make a decision to do something, because they can get so stuck in analysis. Well, I've read this article and this article. I've talked to this person, this person, this person, this person. Everyone's got their opinion, but helping them cut out all of that and focus on, for them, what's most important. There is so much value in doing that. And when someone tells you this has been very helpful, that is a perfect time then to say, are you ready to work together? Should we get started? It's not a big sale.
Absolutely. We had Carl Richards on back in episode 2 and then again recently. And I remember him telling, and he was just a phenomenal conversationalist and just really good at, I think, identifying the wants. He always used to joke that he would tell prospective clients, somebody's going to cry in this meeting and it's not going to be me. And he was usually right because he was just so good at getting to the core beliefs and like the core wants that a client had. But one of the things that he said was it was amazing that he realized he was having a conversation one day. It was in a prospect meeting and he just made a point to just talk as little as possible. And he said almost nothing. I mean, he said he talked just very minimally, just asked good questions, got them talking. And whenever they were leaving, they said, gosh, you're so smart. And he just laughed because he didn't say anything. I mean, he didn't prove how smart he was. He just helped them kind of walk through the process, through his sales process. And it was, anyway, it's just kind of a funny story.
I tell a similar story that I was given a referral and I really do focus on letting them talk most of the time. And he all of a sudden had to go. So our time was cut short. And I remember hanging up, this was years ago, and thinking, gosh, I didn't get to position our value at all. I didn't get to tell him anything about us. And so the next day when the person who made the referral said, how did it go? I was just about to say, well, I'm really not sure because I didn't get to tell him anything. He goes, because I don't know what you did, but he thinks you're brilliant.
I love it.
And it's like, oh my gosh. But in a sales process, not the conversation, but in the sales process, it's okay in a first meeting if all we're doing is data gathering and we're not starting to position. It's okay to just gather information and say, this is, I'm going to, really, look at this more closely. And I'd like our next meeting to be to discuss how we might be able to, address some of these things. And we summarize and take off, some of the pressure of, here's what I heard you say. And now I'd like to think about it. And when we come back together, dig into this a little more, and then we can look at how can we help you. And the decision you're getting at that point is the next meeting. And some people are like, oh, that's stretching things out. But for the right people, that is comforting. Hey, I wasn't pitched that. Hey,
Didn't have to make a decision today.
It was someone trying to understand. Right. And we don't have to push it. We can get the next commitment or the next action that keeps us moving forward and not pushing a sale or a buying decision in that moment.
So then what is the final step? So the T in the...
One last thing about the facilitate is that as we are talking about what we can do and doing that what we can do connected to what's in it for them is often when we're going to hear an objection or we're going to see a concern on their face or hear it in their voice. And so what happens, Alan, when you're feeling under pressure and there's a concern? What are you going to do?
Shut down, hide back in the, it's like a turtle going back in their shell, and it's hard to get them back out.
Well, it's a fight or flight. I mean, just physiologically, our body either wants to fight it or we want to avoid it. But what are you supposed to do then? You remember this part.
Circle back to investigate.
And stop, drop, and roll in that moment. Stop, drop, and roll. So we have to work through those concerns. And often people are like, oh, if I let them verbalize another fear or a concern, it's not going to get us forward. But we've got to work through that and let them talk through whatever that concern is and help them with whatever information they need to be comfortable. And through that, we might be learning more about their real risk tolerance, their real fear about working with somebody else. Maybe we're going to uncover something that's happening within the family dynamics that's the concern. And then you can move forward to then consolidate. And so instead of thinking about closing every conversation, we have to consolidate. We've got to tie all the pieces together and let them know they've been heard. We can, so we can say, what I understand from what you two have told me is that having money for your trips that you want to take every year, is something really important to you. You don't want to be thinking in May, how are you going to fund your June trip? You want to, have that as part of your, financial outlook every year. And that down the road, you're looking at a vacation property or you're looking at, purchasing hunting land or whatever it is. And so in working with you, we can, take a look at, this, and this, which will help you there. So we summarize it, bring it all back together, remind them again of, hey, this is what you want to do. And here's high level how we can help you. Are you ready to take the next step? Or, what's in the way?
I'm not sure it's ever occurred to me before, but it's like a good English paper we were taught in middle school and high school. I mean, this whole process is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you work through and work with them, and then you tell them what you told them. I mean, that was the process for a great paper that we grew up on.
Right, with a twist. Recap what they've told you. Let it be their word. Yeah, but it is. Set the agenda up front. Make sure that, they're on board. Do your investigation, bring out the information, and then at the end, bring it all together in a nice summary, which then leads to what's next. And be very clear what's going to happen next. So what's interesting to me, and I've seen this over and over with some of the financial advisors we've worked with, is that sometimes making that decision, what becomes the biggest fear point for that client is now the paperwork that's going to come afterward. What's now going to happen? If I say, yes, I want to work with you, now, oh my gosh, what do I have to pull together? Are you turning me over to somebody else? And so being very clear on what process follows to alleviate those fears is a huge part of them not second guessing any decisions afterward. So
That's a really good point.
How are you going to make that painless and efficient so that, it doesn't now bog them down?
I think it's such a great point. I'm not sure I've ever really thought about that, because it's such a black hole of kind of what comes next. I know there are some marketing coaches in financial planning that really advocate for infographics and simple graphs to say these are the next steps, and really outlining the process of financial planning from the end of this meeting. A client's, or, with a follow-up, a client says, okay, I'm ready to get started, all the way through the end of the planning process. You really can define every step of it and simplify it. And maybe your process is too complicated if clients are continuing to run away from it out of fear. So these are all the things that kind of get tied together. But again, if we get through a very successful meeting and ultimately the reason they don't sign on is because they don't understand the next step, or the next step seems too confusing or too hard or scary, then we've lost a prospective client on something that honestly is addressable.
Well, and going back to the weight stuff of preparation, we need to be ready to lay out what's next very clearly. So, if we're looking for this outcome from this meeting, what's the next step? Now, what if they say, we're not ready to make this decision yet? We need some more information. Then you've got to be very clear on what's next for that. What information would be helpful for you to reference back?
I want to really emphasize this point, because I think this is huge, and that is how we close out the meeting. If they're not signing the paperwork in your office, which I don't know very many advisors that push a contract in their client, in their prospective client's face in that first meeting. And so what is your recommendation for, I guess, how do you train advisors on how to close out the meeting? Because I think this is just so critical.
So in closing out the meeting, it's being very clear on what decision or action is next, and are they committed to it? Then clearly identifying the next steps, who's doing what, by when. So are you sending them some more information? Are you handing them something, if it's face-to-face, where their commitment is they're going to read it, and getting that next appointment? So let's talk next Tuesday. You'll have a chance to have looked through all of this and give it a time frame. And then, the last thing is, once again, reassuring them that you're there to help them achieve what they want to, and that your phone is open, your email, to be in contact, and that you're accessible and available, so that they're leaving feeling comfortable that you're approachable after they leave, but they know when they're talking to you again. And, some people will be like, well, we just want to think about it, and then we'll get back to you. Be assertive at that point and say, you know what, I find that can get us both in a
life gets in the way,
position.
And it's going to be hard. Yeah.
Yes. So it's let's just next 30 minutes next Tuesday, and our objective for that meeting is to discuss. So is to get your decision. That will freak them out. Our objective for that next meeting is to answer any of the questions that have come to mind, because we've discussed so much today. It's bound to bring up some more discussion between the two of you. You're going to start thinking about this. So it's an opportunity for us to get back and answer your next layer of questions and determine what, is the next possible step. So we set the agenda right then and a time.
Now, correct my numbers, but I remember last time I went through your course, you threw out a number that was a percentage of additional sales that happen when there's a follow-up process put into place. What was that number again? I'm thinking it was like 30%. I mean, it was ridiculous.
It was over a third. And that so many people stop. They have the meeting. If they don't have the next appointment set up, then they're on the chase. and then they give up too soon. And that people that do appropriate follow-up and get those next meetings and, stay on top of it, it was a little over 30%.
It was just over, it was around
a little tidge over 30% more decisions. Because here's the thing is that they might not respond to your next couple of emails or phone calls because they might be stuck in analysis. They might just be stuck with, I'm not sure, I've got more questions. I want to read this. I want to ask somebody this. And so, or something comes up that just pulls their attention, and whatever they were talking to you about now is less of a priority. So our persistence, which I do think is one of the qualities of really good salespeople, is really important. And that might take 6 to 10 follow-ups.
6 to 10. And,
I know,
and most people
painful.
Probably stop at 1 to 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And because then people are like, well, how often do I do that? I mean, do I contact them every day? No, that's a stalker. Do I touch base every month? No, that's not long enough. I think that you have to find, is it once a week? And if you can call them one week, then the next week, maybe it's an email. Mix up the different ways that you're doing it. And do not say or write touching base.
That's an interesting one. Why is that?
Well, it's been shown psychologically to be a very non-event. There's no urgency to that. There's no conviction in that. Instead, we have to be very purposeful. When we last spoke, this is what's going to happen. Let's schedule time to talk for this purpose. We need to be very purposeful. The other thing that I was talking to a marketer recently is that as much as people think, oh, I'm going to be too pushy, that in today's world of over information, people do appreciate having a very clear action to take. So do this, call me back, easily respond to this email. Here's 2 options of time for us to talk. Make it an easy action for them to take, but very clear on what you want them to do.
And I think the final recommendation I would have in all of this is if you can define a really clear follow-up process, and sometimes you have to cater it, to the prospective client. But if you can literally just list out after, I'm going to contact them via phone call after a week, email at week 3, follow-up phone call at week 8, then you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think, is this too often? Is this not often enough? If it's just your process, then you just do your process. And then you don't have to be stressed about it or concerned about it.
It's another to do for you. It's another action step. And in those follow-ups, maybe what's something of value you can give them at that time. Here's a recent article that relates to what we were talking about. Or, here's a recent blog, or a podcast that I found really interesting. I think you might find some value in it, based on what you're trying to accomplish. Give them something of value that shows that you're not just looking for a decision that benefits you, but you're still trying to help them get to their decision.
I love it.
One thing I want to say is that, as we talk about what are the steps of a conversation, it just seems like it's so cumbersome and so comprehensive. And don't forget that you're a person and they're a person, and it's okay to enjoy the conversation and have fun and go off script and, tell a story that's relevant to that, or ask them for, the story of, well, how did you get to that? And make it people talking to each other and enjoy it, because when you enjoy it and your passion comes out, they're going to enjoy it too. So don't lose yourself in a robotic process. Have a framework. Know that that's, your overview of where you're going, but, enjoy the journey along the way.
Totally agree. We are not advocating for a call center script here. This is not they say this, so then I'm going to respond with this answer. It really is a conversation, but allowing yourself to have some structure, which is very awkward the first couple of times you do it. I mean, I know anytime you're thinking about things like this in a conversation, it can be a little awkward, but you get used to it very quickly, and it just gives you a framework for the conversation. But it is not a script. Scripts don't work.
Well, it's funny because I had a huge debate a couple months ago with some other sales thought leaders about scripting, and they're like, nope, people need to be scripted. I'm like, and that's great if the buyer is following the script. But if the buyer goes off the script and we don't understand why this part of the conversation, because here's the thing is, the buyer is going to go off even that script. They're going to start asking you questions before you've done a full investigation. And having that framework helps you go on that tangent for 2 or 3 minutes and maybe give them a bit of information, but then you got to go back and ask more. So it's not A to B to C to D to E. You might go A, B, C, B, C, B, and that's okay because it's a conversation, but where you're going.
Sure. I love it. Well, you have an awesome newsletter and do the sales course, which we never actually said the name of, which is Genuine Sales. I'll say it in the intro, just to be sure people know where to find you. But where can people find more information about you and your company and everything that you do and be able to stay in touch via the newsletter?
Well, go to www.salesproinsider.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there. My contact information is there. I'm very active on LinkedIn, Twitter. So you can connect with me at any of those at Nancy Bleeke, Bleeke, or at Sales Pro Insider. And, we can start a conversation. Genuine sales is about helping you build these skills, but making them your own. So when you bring your authentic expertise to potential clients in a very proactive way, you're going to earn that trust and earn the right to have the right conversations to be able to help them.
And we will put links to all of this in the show notes, as always. So you'll be able to just go to our website and you'll be able to check out all of the information. So Nancy, thank you so much for coming on and giving us just so much valuable information. It's always fun, again, to try to cram 2 days worth of training into an hour. But this was just such an awesome overview. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful for listeners. So thank you.
You know what? I believe in fee-only financial planning. I believe everybody should have one. So there is so much opportunity out there for you. If you add that effective selling into what you're doing, you're going to get to help more people because they need you.
Totally agree.
So thanks for having me, Alan. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks so much. Now, I know we moved through a ton of information and covered a ton of ground in an hour, but I wanted to be sure everyone got a great taste, a great overview of what an effective sales process really looks like. And honestly, if you want to see an amazing sales process, contact Nancy about her course because she will sell you on it and you will see her effectively implementing her own sales process as you're buying from her. She's great at sales and great at conversation, which is just awesome to see. It's simply amazing how much more effective you can be when you just sit down and really think through how that intro meeting is going to go, develop a process for the meeting, and as we mentioned at the end of the episode, actually follow up, which is a huge issue, I think, with financial advisors. Remember, you can join our VIP community to ask XYPN members, guests we've had on the show, Kitsis, myself, as well as other listeners, questions that you have, and all the members of our VIP community to get their perspective at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.